Hello, everyone. Welcome to our thematic webinar series. My name is Ana Carolina, and I will moderate the session of today. So thanks for joining from different parts of the world. I will now do 3 rounds of introduction. So first, I'll introduce the V2V Global Partnership. Following, I will speak about the thematic webinar series itself. And finally, I'll introduce our distinguished speaker of today. So to get us started, the V2V, or Vulnerability to Viability Global Partnership, is a transdisciplinary research, knowledge, and action network with over 100 members from Africa, Asia, Canada, and internationally. The goal of the global partnership is to support small-scale fisheries in their transition from vulnerability to viability. And our focus is on co-creation and co-production of knowledge, as well as to create a repository of the information in the form of an information system that is going to be used by different stakeholders, fishers, researchers and academics, as well as decision makers, developing a transdisciplinary capacity and to do synthesis and integration of knowledge for governance of small-scale fisheries. The V2V Global Partnership aims to identify the diverse factors and conditions contributing to the vulnerability of small-scale fisheries and engage collaboratively with small-scale fishers communities and other key NGO, government, and university partners to enhance small-scale fisheries viability. We are conducting transdisciplinary community-engaged research in 6 countries in Asia, which includes Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, and Thailand, and 6 countries in Africa, which includes Ghana, Malawi, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and Tanzania. So in doing so, the V2V Global Partnership brings people and organizations together across physical, cultural, and disciplinary boundaries through a shared interest in addressing global change impacts on small-scale fisheries. The V2V thematic webinar series is an initiative of the V2V Global Partnership to facilitate and generate high-level discussions on vulnerability and viability themes and topics within the context of small-scale fisheries. And the goal is to feature academics, government representatives, practitioners, and members of the civil society who have made significant contributions to the theoretical, practical, and policy aspects of small-scale fisheries, both locally and globally. And the V2V thematic webinar series takes place on every last Friday of every month through the year of 2022. And the series is available internationally through live stream on YouTube. And details regarding the monthly webinars, including speakers, topics, and the titles, as well as links to the webinar platform, is available on our webpage, which is www.v2vglobalpartnership.org. And today's webinar is the 8th in the series of the V2V thematic webinars planned for the year of 2022, and the 20th since it first started in January 2021. And it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce Dr. Haseeb Irfanullah as our distinguished speaker of today. So Dr. Irfanullah is an independent consultant on environment, climate change, and research systems, and a research fellow at the University of Liberal Arts Bangladesh, ULAB, in its Center for Sustainable Development in Dhaka, Bangladesh. So Dr. Irfanullah is a biologist-turned-development facilitator and has worked for different international environment and development organizations, academic institutions, funders, and the government of Bangladesh in a host of capacities. He has been working with the International Center for Climate Change and Development in Bangladesh and the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative of the University of Oxford to co-create knowledge, build an evidence base, and facilitate a practitioner community on nature-based solutions in Bangladesh. Dr. Irfanullah has written and published extensively on various aspects of inland fisheries and the communities that depend on it, particularly focusing on issues of livelihoods, rights, equity, justice, fair policy processes, and democratic governance. Haseeb is also an active member and a co-applicant of the V2V Global Partnership. It's my honor to invite Dr. Haseeb Irfanullah to deliver today's talk for the V2V thematic webinar series of 2022. His presentation is titled, "What do nature-based solutions and locally-led adaptation mean for small-scale fisheries?" Dr. Haseeb, it's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna, for your generous introduction. Let me share the screen. I believe you can see it.
Yes.
Thank you. It has been an honor and privilege to be part of this fantastic legacy. I would call it a legacy because we are now having 20th thematic webinar for the last 2 years without missing a single month. As Anna mentioned, I will be talking about, I will be introducing two emerging concepts. One is nature-based solutions. In brief, we call it NbS. We will be using this acronym very extensively. The other one is locally-led adaptation, which is obviously adaptation to climate change. In brief, it is called LLA. And I'm sure our audience, they are very much familiar with the other acronym that can be seen on the title, which is small-scale fisheries. So if we are talking about two emerging issues like nature-based solutions and locally-led adaptation, what does it mean for the area we work in, small-scale fisheries? I have outlined my session in these 6 areas, and of course the last one, I need you, the audience, to be part of it. I will be introducing nature-based solutions, the concept, and what are the principles and standards we often talk about. Then I will be introducing the second concept, locally-led adaptation, and its principle, which has been widely being adopted lately. I will try to show that these two, although evolved quite differently by different group of people, but there are some synergies, some thematic synergies between them. Then I will be sharing 2 specific case studies. One will be focusing on nature-based solution, how to see assessment management through that particular lens. And the second case study, I will be seeing SSF management through the people, the community, SSF community, by using LLA lens, locally-led adaptation lens. At the end, I will end my presentation with a few slides on why do we need to build evidence if we really want to make our policy and practices effective. So the first one up is nature-based solutions. Well, we do have lots of different challenges. We face them, whether it is poverty, food or water insecurity. We talk about climate change, disaster. Of course, biodiversity loss is another big challenge we have been facing. Can nature or ecosystem services can help us to overcome those challenges? Yes, they can. If we protect our modified or natural ecosystem, if we manage it sustainably, if we restore it when they get degraded, we are actually practicing nature-based solutions because these are solving or offering solutions to certain societal challenges, as I have listed before. But the most important thing is not only taking those actions and trying to solve our problem, it has to give biodiversity benefit as well. So these simultaneous benefits to human being as well as biodiversity makes nature-based solutions a concept, a fantastic and unique concept. But although the term nature-based solutions or NbS, we have been practicing quite widely over the last 5 years or so, but it is essentially an umbrella concept. Why I'm calling it an umbrella concept? Because it is bringing together so many different actions we have been practicing, not for the last few decades, but literally for centuries. Let me give you some examples. When we protect our ecosystems, whether it is a wetland or a forest or a mangrove, we are actually practicing nature-based solutions. When we use biodiversity or ecosystem services to adapt to climate change, like we can brand it as ecosystem-based adaptation, or if we want to tackle disaster by practicing ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction or eco-DRR, these are all nature-based solutions. When we talk about nature infrastructure or green infrastructure, when we talk about integrated coastal zone management or water management, we are practicing nature-based solutions. Finally, as we all know, our ecosystem is not in a good shape. So when we have a degraded ecosystem, we need to restore it so that it can function once again as it was supposed to. This is nature-based solution. So these all bullet points, these are actually bringing together a wealth of practices that we have been engaged in over centuries. So nature-based solution is an umbrella concept, and this is the framework ICCCAD proposed a few years back. It talks about three aspects. One is approaches, which has to be ecosystem-based. The second one is it must address certain one or more societal challenges, as we have discussed in the previous slide. Finally, it will give two types of benefits. One is human, other is biodiversity. Some quick examples. Nature-based solutions can be practiced in so many different ecosystems. When we protect our natural ecosystem, when we restore them, when we create a new one, we not only benefit ourselves by sequestering carbon or conserving water for ourselves or getting a green belt against cyclones, we are also supporting the ecosystem to revive, to survive, and enhance the biodiversity and ensure the integrity of the ecosystem as it's supposed to be. Floating agriculture is a fantastic traditional practice, but now it has got a new momentum, new branding. It has become an ecosystem-based adaptation. In this particular photograph that I took a few years back from southern Bangladesh, where water hyacinth is used to prepare floating bed on which seedlings are raised, vegetables are cultivated, especially under waterlogged condition, which is a nature-based solution. Moving to urban setting, this is another photograph from Bangladesh, which is the capital Dhaka. Waterlogging was a serious problem 15 years back in Dhaka city. Then we restored this wetland and connected with the main river system through different canals. It not only gave ourselves the benefit like flood management, but also enhanced aquatic biodiversity as well. So it is a nature-based solution. But it is not like that. Nature-based solution has to be something quite big. No, in agricultural setting, if we practice agroforestry by integrating tree in the agricultural land, if we practice conservation agriculture, if we reduce the animal grazing intensity, if we improve the drainage system when we do rice cultivation, altogether they will definitely improve not only our natural resource management, but also contribute to soil biodiversity and ecosystem as a whole will be improved. That's why these are the nature-based solutions in agricultural setting. In aquaculture even, ecosystem approach can be taken. For example, the EAA, ecosystem approach to aquaculture, where ecosystem function and services are nurtured, are developed, and not only the biodiversity benefit, but it also improves human well-being as well as equity. Otherwise, without those principles, you can't call it an ecosystem approach to aquaculture. So you can see that there are so many different ways, so many different arenas we can practice nature-based solutions. But often it is said that nature-based solutions, it doesn't have any widely accepted definition. How can we say that this is nature-based solution, this is not? I can give you a couple of examples which can help us to define what do we mean by nature-based solutions. The first one is some guiding principle, very simple, only 4 of them. A group of researchers from all over the world actually came together. They identified 4 guiding principles, and it was published last year in one of the peer-reviewed journal articles I will be sharing today. The first one is we need to remember nature-based solutions. Sometimes we make it a kind of an overrated idea. It is kind of a silver bullet to climate change. No, it is not. Without phasing out of fossil fuel, we can't fight climate change. This is the ultimate option. But definitely, nature-based solution can contribute. The second one is when we talk about nature-based solutions, we often say it is just forest, planting trees miles after miles. No, not like that. There are a wide range of ecosystems, not only on land but also on the sea, in the sea. And we need to nurture those options as well. The third one is often we implement nature-based solutions in an area which is biodiverse. So it is important that the local communities as well as indigenous people who are very much involved in because of their livelihoods and lives, very much engaged with those ecosystems. We must ensure that we are respecting their not only cultural rights, but also ecological rights. The fourth one is very important that actually brings the science here, the hardcore science. You can't call a nature-based solution an action, one of the actions, a nature-based solution intervention, unless until it offers measurable biodiversity benefit. This is so crucial. So these 4 guiding principles were proposed by a group of organizations. Exactly 2 years back, during COVID, I think, if I'm not wrong, it would be 23rd July 2020, when IUCN publicly declared that they are proposing IUCN Global Standard for NbS. It talks about that if you really want to have an NbS intervention, you need to abide by 8 criteria, and under each criterion, there are 3 or 4 different indicators. So altogether, there are 8 criteria and 28 indicators. In this slide, I will talk about only the criteria. The first one talks about what societal challenge we want to fight with a nature-based solution option. So we need to have a clear understanding of that, and we need to prioritize that. Otherwise, nature-based solution cannot effectively address those particular challenge. The second one is we must have the knowledge to design nature-based solution according to that scale it needs to be designed. So that scale of design is very important. We need to know all the relevant information, the societal information, the society-related social information, economic information, as well as environmental information. That will help us to design it properly. The third one is a nature-based solution intervention must result in biodiversity gain, and it has to be a net biodiversity. The fourth one is it has to be economically feasible. Otherwise, you can't replicate it, you can't sustain it. The fifth one is we can call it governance criterion. And it talks about that nature-based solution during from design phase to implementation monitoring, it has to have a transparent system, inclusive system, and it should empower the people, the stakeholders throughout the process. The sixth one is trade-off, because we all know that when we implement something new, we might lose something on a short-term basis to gain something on a long-term basis. So those kind of understanding is very important, and not only understanding, all the stakeholders, they need to abide by it. Before that, they need to agree upon it, and they need to monitor it. That yes, those trade-offs are happening, and it is a balanced one. The seventh one is nature-based solution a particular nature-based solution, it continues. Maybe our project funding ended, but the intervention cannot end, because when you plant a tree, it doesn't stop growing at the end of the project. Or the management system that you put in place, you don't expect that it will stop them. So during the project, so many different things might happen. So we need to be adaptive to manage those changes based upon evidence. And I emphasize that it is not only during the project, but beyond the project. And that brings in the final point, or final criterion, which talks about the sustainability and mainstreaming of a particular good nature-based solution intervention, so that we can replicate it, scale it up in similar jurisdiction. So all these 8 criteria, they are actually guiding us, helping us to believe which one is a nature-based solution. This is the framework, as you can see in the center, the societal challenges, and that goes out. You can see at the end, the outer circle talks about mainstreaming and sustainability. IUCN didn't stop there. They've developed a guiding tool, which is called self-assessment tool. You just sending an email, there's a link, the email address is in the link. I can share that in the YouTube chat later on. And if you want to design a new nature-based solution project, if you ask yourself, is it really a new nature-based, is it really a nature-based solution in true sense, you can use this tool. If you want to scale up a already existing nature-based solution, if you want to identify what are the gaps, you can use it. And if you want to assess a past project and design a future proposal, you can use it. I will be coming back to this self-assessment tool when I will be describing the first case study. So you will be hearing more from me on this self-assessment tool. Now, let me introduce the second concept, which is locally-led adaptation. And it has got a few principles. I will be sharing those as well. So locally-led adaptation, as it sounds, it will be the local entities, they will be leading the adaptation process to climate change. So if we think the lowest possible administrative level, and if we think the local community there, local organization there, local government there, federations are there, local other stakeholders are there, and they all come together and they are trying to identify, they're trying to prioritize, and they plan, they implement, they monitor, evaluate, they learn climate change adaptation actions. We are actually talking about locally-led adaptation. But it is not like that they will be working in a silo. No, they need to collaborate with the national government, provincial government, donor, civil society organizations, facilitators. So the collaboration is a very integral part of it. It may sound like it sounds quite familiar, isn't it? It is, because we used to have another concept which was very much focused on community. We call it community-based adaptation. But now we are actually expanding it. We are keeping it in an administrative jurisdiction and allowing some collaboration beyond that jurisdiction. There was another concept called community-based natural resource management. And those learnings actually helped us to define, refine, and improve this concept called locally-led adaptation. And the result of it, this list, there are 8 principles. The first principle talks about that decision-making should be at the lowest appropriate level. Very simple principle. Second one talks about structural inequity. We need to address the structural inequity so that the marginalized groups can come together and they can be part of the locally-led adaptation process. The third principle talks about funding. The funding has to be patient. We have to provide patient and predictable funding. It has to be easily accessible, because otherwise it will not work. The fourth one talks about local capacity, so that it can continue, it can be institutionalized. The fifth one talks about knowledge, understanding, that what are the climate risks we are talking about? What are the uncertainties in those climate risks? because of the increasing risk that we have been seeing all over the world. The sixth one is about programming and learning from the program, but the program has to be flexible because we are talking about adaptation. We have to be adaptive. The seventh one is ensuring transparency and accountability, because it is straightforward, the governance issue. The final one is collaborative action and investment, because, as I said, we can't work in silos, and we need investment to continue. Now, let us focus on, since we have now learned about nature-based solutions and the locally led adaptations, the standards and principles, how can we synergize them? So now on this slide, I have put all the principles on the right-hand side and the NbS standard, the criteria on the left-hand side. Just think of a climate change context, because otherwise we can't synergize them. So in a climate change context, if we think, well, if we are thinking of governance, we can see that fifth criterion talks about governance under nature-based solution. On the other hand, in locally led adaptation, we can see governance is so much spread out in many of the principles. If we think of capacity, we need to have the capacity to measure biodiversity. When we're talking about nature-based solution, we need to measure the economic viability. Similarly, capacity development is also thought of in the principles of locally led adaptation. If we think of knowledge, understanding, yes, if we want to design a proper nature-based solution, we need to understand the societal challenge. We need to design it properly. Similarly, under locally led adaptation, we need to understand the robustness. We have to have the proper understanding, the robust understanding of climate risks and future uncertainties. Same goes for trade-off. It talks about equitable trade-off. It talks about transparent trade-off. And finally, the economic viability comes again when we talk about funding. As you can see, there's an arrow between number 4 on the left column and the number 3 on the right column. When we talk about adaptive management on the number 7 criterion of nature-based solution, and it is linked with the flexible programming. So we're talking about adaptive management there. And finally, if we want to mainstream something, if we want to sustain something, definitely we have to go for collaboration. We need to continue investment. So obviously, we can't say that they are saying, no, because these are nature-based solution is a action we take, intervention we take, and these are the criteria which can help us to make it good, effective nature-based solution. On the other hand, when we want to follow the adaptation, locally led adaptation, we have to abide by certain principles. So we can't say they are similar or equal, but they are complementary. So just think of, if we want to implement a nature-based solution in a local setting, we have to follow the locally led adaptation principle to make it a proper locally led adaptation action. But to make it nature-based solution, a good nature-based solution, we need to think of what are the standards, what are the criteria it is fulfilling. That's how, in a bigger LLA setting, nature-based solution to fight climate change can come in. But if we want to make that kind of mainstreaming in our programming, in our policy, the first thing is we have to recognize nature-based solution works, nature-based solutions important. Same goes for LLM. What happened? Of course, in COP meetings, as you know that last November, the COP26 ended with a document called Glasgow Climate Pact. Of course, nature-based solutions, the terminology hasn't been used there, but the importance of protecting nature, ecosystem, using ecosystem services, those philosophies, those actions have been extensively mentioned there. So we can say that importance of nature has been very much appreciated. On the other hand, the Convention on Biological Diversity, you may expect that, well, since the global the parties, I mean the members of Convention on Biological Diversity, they have been preparing post-2020 global biodiversity framework for last couple of years. When they published the first draft, they are calling it zero draft actually. It was published exactly 2 years back. Interestingly, it included the term nature-based solutions. But 1 year later, or 11th month later, when they published the first draft, they actually removed the term nature-based solutions. One of the reasons would be that these UN bodies, they have to have an agreed definition on something. And since there hasn't been a COP, of course, the first meeting virtually happened a few months back, and the next part of COP15 will be happening in December in Montreal. But since there hasn't been any agreed definition, that's why those terminologies wouldn't be included. But things have changed in March. United Nations Environment Assembly, which the fifth one, it ended on 2nd March, and it actually adopted for the first time, an UN body adopted a definition of nature-based solutions. This is the one I'm not going to read through, but it is essentially based upon IUCN's definition that I showed in the very first slide. It just elaborates certain issues and adds certain words. For example, it added conservation. It talks about not only sustainable management, but use. It explains what kind of modified and natural ecosystems we are talking about: terrestrial, freshwater, marine, coastal. It talks about not only societal challenges, but also economic and environmental challenges. And finally, it talks about not only human well-being and biodiversity benefits. It has added 2 more terms: ecosystem services and resilience. So you can see we're talking about same thing, but in a more elaborate way. Talking about LLA, of course, I'm not going to, and you are not going to read all the names. But the point I'm trying to make, until 18th August this month, almost 80 organizations, government entities, all over the world, from the global north, global south, from Bangladeshi NGOs from Africa, elsewhere, all came together and they have started endorsing LLA principles, the 8 principles I have shared with you a few slides back. So you can understand the recognition of locally led adaptation. The second point is, during COP26, of course, the term locally led adaptation hasn't been included, the global climate, the Glasgow Climate Act, but different donors, different global leaders, they actually promised to mobilize $450 million to implement locally led approaches to build climate resilience. And the Glasgow Climate Pact recognizes the importance why we need to appreciate the cultures and knowledge of indigenous people and the local community. And there are a few other examples of global recognition. And coming to development partners, earlier this year, FCDO, the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the United Kingdom, they launched a new project in Bangladesh, which will be running for 5 years and worth £120 million. As you can see, it has got 4 different outcomes, but the first outcomes has got 2 outputs. And the first output, 1.1, clearly mentioned they want to see scaling up of locally led adaptation, nature-based solutions, and financing for adaptation. So all these 3 things are coming together under this particular project being implemented in Bangladesh, which is called Bangladesh Climate and Environment Program. My last evidence to prove that nature-based solution has been mainstreamed, I will give you an example from Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, we, over the last 7 years probably, we have been producing climate relevant budget every year. This year, when we our parliament passed the national budget, $3.4 billion for next 12 months has been allocated as climate relevant budget, which will be spent by 25 different ministries and government agencies. And interestingly, this is 4.5% of our national budget and 0.7% of our national GDP. Of course, we can't pinpoint that how much money will be allocated for nature-based solutions or to promote locally-led adaptation, but you can understand much of it will be. What about the policy document or policy instruments in that sense? Well, we are quite good at it. We prepared a fantastic Bangladesh climate strategy and action plan in 2009. We are in the process of preparing and finalizing Bangladesh adaptation plan of 2022. And these documents actually talks about ecosystem services, using nature ecosystem to build the people's resilience and adaptive capacity. But not only climate change documents, our long-term plans like Bangladesh Delta Plan, which is a kind of an 80-year-long plan, our perspective plan, which actually talks about how we will be becoming a developed country by 2041, our shorter 5-year plan, all these plans actually talking about or have talked about ecosystem services, ecosystem conservation, but not necessarily talked about nature-based solution per se, because this is a very new term. But the last one, National Adaptation Plan of Bangladesh, and this one, Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan, these two plans actually adopted locally led adaptation and nature-based solutions like anything. It has just mainstream these two concepts. So you can see the legacy, how talking about environment, talking about environmental sustainability, conservation actually paid off at the end of the day when we prepare our very forward-looking documents like Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan. Now coming to the case studies. I will be sharing 2 case studies. The first one is restoration and sustainable management of a globally important wetland, which is based in Bangladesh. And I will be talking about Tangwar How. It is a fantastic ecosystem. Just look at it. Of course, I visited quite a few times, but I intentionally took these 2 photographs from the same point back in 2016. Just imagine during dry season, on the left-hand side, how the whole ecosystem looked like, pockets of water and many dry highlands. On the other hand, during monsoon, in the middle of the monsoon, it drastically changed. You can see the top of the trees or saplings very nicely. It is a Ramsar site. It means it is very important globally for waterfowl as a waterfowl habitat. And Ramsar is you all know, the Ramsar Convention was adopted in 1971, which is quite important on 2nd February it was adopted. And I must admit that 1971 is a very important year for Bangladesh because we got independence in that year. Talking about this particular case study, if we look into what happened, it is a kind of a story of 100 years or 90 years. It was a wetland, it has its water, it gets flooded, it has had fish, swamp, reeds, birds, everything. Rice was being cultivated during dry season. It was a kind of a regular rural setting. But things changed since 1930s, and it continued for 70 years because the whole area was leased out. And obviously, as you can understand, in this region, it often gets captured by the elites. So it led into over-exploitation of fisheries resources, all the resources, the swamp trees, reeds, everything got degraded. Things changed at the turn of the century when the government of Bangladesh declared that, well, this wetland should be ecologically critical area because its health is no longer as good as it used to be even 20 years back. So that happened in 1999, and in the very next year, it was declared as Ramsar site. In the following year, the whole wetland was kind of under the jurisdiction of Ministry of Land, which handed over the Tangwar Haur, the Ministry of Environment and Forest. And since then, leasing system stopped. After 5 years, a 10-year-long project started. That particular project is called Community-Based Sustainable Management of Tangwar Haur. It was funded by the Swiss government, Swiss Development Agency for Cooperation. There was co-finance from the government as well. And the executing agency was Ministry of Environment and Forest. And IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature, and its partner NGOs, they started implementing projects. What did they do? They did so many things. I have just listed down the major ones. The first thing was making the management system, the government system inclusive. So there were different tiers of committees, village committees, local government committee, the central committee, as well as the ecosystem level committee, which is called THMC, Tangwar Haur Management Committee, which is bringing together not only the local community, but also government service provider as well as administrator. One of the most important thing was done was fishing access. So the people who were living around, which couldn't officially, formally got chance to catch fish from this particular ecosystem, they started getting that access. And on the right-hand corner, you can see I have put the percentage. When the fish was caught, the government regulation was passed. That benefit will be shared among the 3 different entities. The fisherman, he or she will be getting 40% of the income. The community-based organization will be getting 36, and the government will be getting 24 because it is they are managing it as well. Besides this fisheries access management system and benefit sharing system, which is supported by the legal and policy instruments, we also saw livelihood improvement, resource protection system, biodiversity enhancement, and women empowerment. But that particular donor-funded project ended in 2016. But a rare development happened. The government actually put its own money to design a bridging project for 2 years. Of course, many of the activities couldn't be supported during this bridging phase, but the CBOs, the community-based organizations, they were transformed into cooperatives so that they can be guided by the government system. And the fishing permit and the benefit sharing that continued with the administration and the central committee, and the resources were protected through guarding. And although the project ended in December 2018, so since 2019, 2021, and 22, there is no project, but still certain activities are carrying out. That is the fantastic thing. That legal regime actually helped to keep the local community vibrant. And the administration, the political power, they were actually supporting the whole thing. Very recently in May, UNDP has got the approval from GEF, Global Environment Facility. So there will be a new project carrying forward the gaps or the need for further improvement in managing this ecosystem. Although it will be implemented by UNDP, but the Department of Environment of the Government of Bangladesh will be closely engaged along with others. So this is the story of last, say, 90 years or so. So what these are some photographs. You can see that agricultural activities going on, the plantation program, and of course, ecotourism is booming in recent years. So what can we learn from Tangwar Haur? We can learn that individual households, we need to invest in them so that they can be aware, they can realize the importance of the ecosystem, they can trust that change is possible, We need to build their capacity, knowledge, and skills. Then comes, we need to give incentive to the individual as well as the community, as I have just mentioned, the benefit sharing mechanism, livelihood opportunities, saving the loan schemes. But we also need to give some space so that the community and the stakeholders can come together and they can govern and interact and do the betterment and contribute to the betterment of the ecosystem. And all these things will ensure that the communities are empowered and they are delivering effective restoration and co-management of the tangled power. But all will fall apart at the end of the project until we have the policy, appropriate policy and legal regime. They will act as a glue and bind everything together. So individual level, household level, community stakeholder, and system level changes need to come together. That's the learning, the lessons we have learned from the tangled power over the last 15 years or so. But can we call the sustainable fisheries management, can we call it an NbS intervention? What can we do? We can use the self-assessment tool to measure whether we can call the sustainable fisheries management in tangled hull and NbS or not. So what we should be doing while using this self-assessment tool? I'm not going to go to the detail, pardon for this very busy slide. So what we are trying to do here, just to guide you, you see that there is a criterion 1 and under it 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. These are the 3 indicators we will be ranking this particular activity against. So you can see that criterion 1, there are 3, and you can see the first 2. This particular project was strongly aligned to nature-based solution standard. But the third one, it was adequate, not strong, but adequate, which is good. Same goes for the criterion 2, 3, and 4. You can see that under criterion 3, when it talks about that measuring biodiversity conservation outcome, it did very poorly. That's why it has been ranked insufficient, which is bad. But otherwise, these 4 criteria, we can see most of the criteria was abiding by global standard, being strong and adequate. But what is happening with the rest of the criteria indicator? Well, not so good. Not a single one apparently was strongly adhered to the global standard. Quite a few were partial and one was insufficient. I'm not going into detail and why those have been categorized like that. There were some documents, some evidence. Those pieces of evidence were used to rank different indicators in that way. But when all the 8 criteria and 28 indicators have been ranked, a self-assessment tool will produce this one. You can see that the top 5 criteria are green, which is good. Partial is also good, but the 6th one is doing quite bad, only 33% in alignment. So because of that, although it was partial, but as a whole, this project was in adherence to the IUCN global standard. So this is the way we can measure, we can judge whether a particular intervention can involve nature-based solutions or not. Now, coming to the second case study, which is about transformative adaptation of coastal fishing communities in Bangladesh. I have taken help from 2 different studies, which were conducted over the last couple of years. Bangladesh, as you can see, it is a, excuse me. Bangladesh, as you can see, it has got a moderate coastline, which is a very small country, highly populated country. But the coastline, it has got mangrove on the southwest corner, as you can see, the shaded green. But it is prone to coastal flooding, tidal surge, storm surge, cyclones, very frequent, very frequent. And there was a study conducted on the southeast coast of Bangladesh, and it was asked to the small-scale fishermen that what obstacles you face. So the top 4 ones were the destructions of houses, boat, nets, roads, and of course the death of fishermen. But how you are tackling, because your houses are getting destroyed and other facilities are getting destroyed, how you're adapting to these climate extremities? Well, for water, those fishing communities were talking about harvesting rainwater or having installing individual tube wells, or they were raising their house plinth or making it stronger, or for electricity they were using biogas or solar panel, this sort of thing. So those are the top 4 ones. But when they were asked, what are the barriers for adaptation? What are the limits? They were talking about the top ones was with finance. Income was there low, so that they were facing financial crisis during extreme event. And they were, if there was any credit schemes, those were unfavorable. They also talked about lack of education, lack of technical skills, so they couldn't divert towards any alternative livelihood option. Cyclones came in a big way because they were now more frequent. They stayed for longer period. The wind speed is higher. But information, that also quite important. Not getting accurate information in terms of cyclone or weather forecast, that actually put themselves in danger. A weak radio signal was also came in their responses. And finally, the fish markets, access to fish markets or lack of law enforcement came up. So you can see that there are lots of conventional adaptation options. We call them, some are kind of incremental adaptation option. Some can be called coping mechanism, actually. Those are not actually adaptation. That's why we need to think of transformative adaptation. It means the system in larger scale will change, which cannot be done by individual fishermen. And those can be, for example, in this particular article by Islam in 2021, they talked about if we want to make an original system transformative adaptation, you need to restructure it, like diversifying livelihood. You need to change the system, like a cyclone shelter. The number should enhance, the communication should be better. You need to facilitate the path shifting, like migration option, voluntary migration option. Sometimes technological innovation is so important to make those transformative adaptation, or making those transformative changes in opposed to conventional adaptation. And finally, multi-scale options. For example, in this case, they talked about reforestation program. And in southwest and central coast of Bangladesh, this particular article identified that the fishing communities, they have been practicing all these things to some extent, or there were some opportunities for those. It could be having better house, diversifying livelihood, migration, so having a safer migration to a safer place, improve saline water treatment plant, or some other technological development, for example, access to saline-tolerant crops, these sort of things. So transformative adaptation could be possible there, but the authors, they concluded that although those could be done, but to make the weakness, to overcome the weakness of those strategies, we need to, I would mention a few, we need to reduce the uncertainty using access to information, the better information, better forecast, increasing awareness. We need to talk about fund on the bottom options. As you can see, fund for implementation of those interventions, as well as training and skill development. Those are needed to support those transformative adaptation. But if we look into global literature, we can see that transformative adaptation has got some basic barriers in the core. that cannot be resolved by the small scale fishing communities. Impossible. And those include that sometimes political support, transformative adaptation, that it doesn't get political support because you need high investment. It takes time to show the benefit. And sometimes you need, you are not quite familiar with those terms and options. That's why people prefer a status quo. There are issues of imbalance, inequality. Sometimes they get discouraged because you need to bring together multiple stakeholders. You need to think of future. You need to build that scenario, that vision, and you need to think of what are your priorities, what are the values. So all these complex things work as a barrier, but locally-led adaptation principles can help to overcome those barriers. So that's the point I'm trying to make through this second case study. My last point is why do we need to build evidence to make proper change in the policy and practice? There are so many different initiatives on nature-based solutions. For example, the University of Oxford's it has got nature-based solution initiative, as well as it has got a program on biodiversity and society. They published different systematic review on the global at the global scale, how nature-based solution is effective or not. At country context, in Bangladesh, we have done the same by analyzing, showcasing that nature-based solution can address climate change as well as other sustainable development goals. You can have a look into it. And we have also established a nature-based solution network in Bangladesh. We have the portal, NbSBangladesh.info. You can follow us on Twitter, social media. And in case of locally-led adaptation, just 2 months back, on left-hand side, from all over the world, some examples, fantastic examples of practice of locally-led adaptation have been captured in this WRI publication. And just 3 months back, 3-4 months back in May, there was the first consultation on locally-led adaptation in Bangladesh, and a network has been formed on locally-led adaptation. So you can understand so many different activities are going on to bring knowledge with practice. And I would like to end with this particular flowchart, where I would like to show that we researchers need to work together with practitioners and policymakers, and V2B global partnership is all about this. And of course, there is another component is community, but I'm talking about how knowledge will be flowing to influence the policymaker, and community is definitely an integral part of it. So there is a demand over the last couple of years that we need to find the evidence from regarding nature-based solution, and researchers they did capture those and they disseminated those through different options, through networks, which involves both practitioners and policymakers. But in case of, as the practitioners, they work with the local communities, often we see that the project M&Es are being done, but the documentation is limited. But that's why we see that practitioners often cannot influence the policymakers because there's a gap, there's an absence of evidence-led policy practice linkage. But things are changing. For example, let me give you a couple of examples. In post-COVID era, the policy can be focused to say how nature-based solution can contribute to economic recovery, because it has got economic recovery potential, and how can we include SSF in that discussion. Similarly, adaptation has its own limit. So how can we address climate-induced losses and damage by using the LLA principle and taking nature-positive actions for the SSF communities? If we can work together, the community, the practitioners, all can work together, and researchers, we can gather evidence and we can translate those evidence with the policymaker, and we all can come together so that the human biodiversity benefits can be achieved, while tackling multiple societal challenges like pandemic, climate change, and other stresses, man-made stresses. That's the integration of all the elements and which I wanted to share. So that's all from me. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening to me. Please feel free to share whenever you are listening to this talk. Please do post in the comment box to share your story of nature-based solution and locally-led adaptation that you saw, experienced, planned, practiced, or research on, especially with the small-scale fisheries community. That's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Haseeb, for this amazing presentation. Very interesting how you combine the theoretical, the global level discussions from the UN, the IUCN, and then you ground that into two interesting case studies, and how do you apply the theoretical background into more grounded discussion. We now have our discussion session open in the YouTube channel. So if you have any questions for Haseeb, please write down your questions and then we'll discuss it here. And to get us started, I would like to ask you, how do you see nature-based solutions as a pathway to transition from vulnerability to viability in the small-scale fisheries sector?
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Thank you very much for appreciating the talk. Yes, nature-based solution, as we have seen that it talks about societal challenges, isn't it? And how challenged and how diverse types of challenges our fishing SSF communities are facing all over the world. We have published quite a few working papers, isn't it, under this particular program, B2B Global Partnership. And all actually shows us the vulnerability. But if we want to shift from vulnerability to resilience, we need to integrate, we need to think not only it's as a societal issue or the social aspect or policy aspect, we need to bring the ecology, the ecosystem in it. You can't avoid it. And many of the areas where our fisher folk living and trying to continue their livelihood are very much degraded, no doubt about it. Whether it is mangrove forests in Indonesia or Bangladesh or in elsewhere in Dhaka, everywhere we see that. So when we talk about fishing communities, if we think of mangrove fishing, offshore, near-shore fishing, if we just giving an example, we can get multiple benefit if we just restore it. But while restoring it, we need to keep in mind we can't just leave it like that. Because there is I was reading a recent article published earlier this year from Indonesia, how abruptly the fishing actually jumped because of in the 5 years time when the restoration of mangrove started, but it was a kind of uncontrollable. All the fish diversity that was enhanced, controlling it was a really, really challenge. So definitely nature-based solution can help us to shift from vulnerability to viability, but we need to think of the principles of nature-based solution or the standards of nature-based solutions so that we can sustain it. Otherwise, it will be a lost concept.
Yes, thank you very much. We're checking if you have any questions or discussion points that you'd like to add. You can write on the chat and we'll discuss it here. So feel free to add your questions as you wish.
One thing I will be doing, Anna, that after finishing this conversation, I will be sharing some links so that those who can see it later on, they can interact with those links and learn more about it and get involved into the discussion beyond this 1 hour session.
Oh, yes, that's great. Yes, you mentioned your presentation. You can, if you have any type of examples that you can share, or if you're interested to learn more, that would be great. And if you can mention a little bit about your integration into these bigger networks that are related to localized initiatives and nature-based solutions. Do you see integration between them and conversations? If you can explore a little bit that aspect.
Oh yeah, let me tell a little bit about the nature-based solution network. It has been, we have been working, during the COVID, of course, all the meetings were online back then. And the idea was sharing different activities going on. How can we share our learning of practicing nature-based solution in one place and spread the word through webinar and seminar and others, and publishing some papers on that. One of the, I can mention one of the activities that there was a project to measure in Bangladesh as well as in Peru, what are the economic recovery potential of nature-based solutions. And after conducting that research, we went back to the network members to get their vetting that the way we are defining economic recovery potential, the dimensions we were using, what do you think about it? Have we missed something? Do you know any cases from elsewhere in a diverse ecosystem that we can incorporate and make our evidence stronger? So this is the way it can become a kind of a validation platform, knowledge sharing platform, and it can help us all, help us both ways.
Yes, well, thank you very much. And we have another question from Shagufta Islam. For aquaculture, how can nature-based solutions and the LLA be adapted towards its policies or laws provided by the government, since small-scale fisheries have scarce knowledge on it?
That's a very interesting point. Thanks, Shigutta, for that. Often I was listening to a debate the other day that, oh my God, when we talk about climate change, so many new concepts are coming in. We find it quite difficult to explain it to our colleagues on the ground as well as the community. The thing is, as we learn, we try to define things more elaborately or a different way. For example, locally-led adaptation, why it has been, we are talking about it. We are talking about it because we found that community-based adaptation, it has got its own limitations. So if we can bring together all the actors and kind of offer them some guiding principles, things will be much better. So one important point is communication. For example, like the way I am communicating now, that kind of conversation is so important. And having guiding principles, having standards, and communicating it very simple way is so important. So we need to talk about science communication in a big way. Science communication is not like that. It should be action oriented. This shouldn't be only for, communicating the medicine, the treatment. No. Science communication, we need to work communicating the science, the knowledge, how to reach to the people on the ground so that they can appreciate the fact, yes, we are doing it, why not we mainstream it? So I see it in that way. Thanks, Shagufta, for the question.
Yes, thank you very much. Communication is seems to be something very important, especially in this local to global type of initiatives where I have many partners and different stakeholders, the local people, university people, governments, and the ways that people communicate in these different sectors might also differ. So it's also a learning how you communicate across sectors. And thank you very much for your presentation, for your answers, for all the insights. That was very, very interesting and gave us some inputs on how nature-based solutions is also a way to help in the V2V transition towards more viable small-scale fisheries. What I'd like to do next is to introduce our next thematic webinar. Our next thematic webinar will take place in September 30. And we'll have two speakers for September months, Melissa Marshka and Peter Vandergest. So this will be another interesting talk on unacceptable working conditions in global fishing, lawlessness, criminality, or enabling policies and political economies. So this will be our thematic webinar for next month. I'd like to thank you all very much for participating and engaging in the thematic webinar of today, and especially Dr. Haseeb Irfanullah for your great presentation and contributions to the discussions on vulnerability to viability in the small-scale fisheries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. It's a pleasure and honor to be here and sharing some of my thoughts. And I believe the conversation will continue beyond this session. Thank you. Thank you
yes.
to the Global Partnership as well.
Thank you very much.